Okay, so today I am starting to study models in a little bit more depth. I've sort of studied generically with like C-bet strategies and stuff like that. The reality of the shortcomings of studying a lot of flop strategies, most especially the EVs, if you look at the strategy plus EV for any various option on any formation, any position, any texture, or whatever, on a very, very, very high percentage of scenarios, the EV is going to be the same, meaning that it's indifferent. And what that means is that it doesn't really matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you go 1/3 with range that much. It doesn't matter if you have the perfectly refined button versus big blind spot where the button overbets exactly 28% on this flop right here and checks all the right combos. It really just doesn't matter. And if you go to all this trouble without learning how to play the subsequent streets on turns and rivers, especially now that you've given yourself all these new nodes with all these different lines that you take, you might actually be doing yourself a disservice and playing even worse, given that you get into all these spots and don't know what to do with once you get there. So I want to keep that in mind as a central limitation of this sort of studying. And I want to go ahead and I want to try to do this anyways. Don't know how far I'll get, but I want to study this just kind of given how difficult it is, how original the strategies look, because wide range play is definitely very difficult, especially when you're out of position. And I think if we can learn how to play this a little bit better, it will serve us well over time for this spot just for the sake of itself. But the skills and the concepts will also transfer better and hone in on what we already know or how we already play. And as you probably know, in a single raise pot on Ace King 5 Rainbow, that's going to be one of the most polar boards for any preflop aggressor in a single raise pot out there, if not the single most. You're going to have overbetting in any formation, whether it be under the gun or the button, or as we'll soon see, the small blind. But the wider the formation is, the little bit trickier it gets to play. And that's kind of why I want to start at this point and then go through a number of textures and kind of be a little bit less clueless given how common the blind versus blind scenario is in any online 6-max game. So going forward, we see this is our range. I'm not calling anything. We're raising, 44% of hands, whatever. Pretty standard. I'd probably throw in Ace 3, Jack 3, 10, 5, 9, 5, Jack 8. I'm probably a little bit wider than this, but you get the point. And this is what we're calling with. You see we have a pretty polarized 3-betting strategy. Don't really want to get into this here. We will cover this later, maybe not. But yeah, they're going to be pretty condensed here. So yeah, let's get to the flop strategy here. We've got complex tallied up. I was going to wait for this to load. So we see when given the option to, we have a plethora of betting here. We check just under half the time. About 30% of the time, we're going 1/3 or less. And then what is that, 20? So 13, 16, 17. Yes, almost a quarter of the time we are overbetting from sizes ranging from 115 to 320. And that is pretty significant. And so what I want to start by doing here is I want to think about the why for everything in our range here. I want to look at every combo and I want to look at this and I want to dissect this. So I think it's easiest to start with the nuts and the top of range and value. Why do we see Ace King, Ace Queen, Ace Jack? Why do we see our best Ace X hands overbetting various sizes between 138 and 321 here? Pretty mixed frequency. And the answer to that is because our best hands, when we have a nut advantage, want to build a pot and get it in. These hands want to stack off on this texture as it stands, top pair, top kicker, etc. These are monster hands, and in a wide range formation, I mean, they're just, especially on a non-flush draw board, they're going to absolutely crush. So Ace Queen wants to get it in versus Ace Jack. Ace Jack wants to get it in versus Ace 10. Ace King wants to get it in versus King 5, or Ace 8. I mean, all of these hands. So if we look through what Big Blind continues with, we're going to get an insight into why these hands are betting the way they are. So let us start with the 115. And we see that every combo of ace-x of top pair is calling. And we see that a pretty healthy percentage of any pair on the board is calling. I mean, almost all the 5x is calling. The majority of the suited king x is calling, and even a non-negligible percentage of the offsuit king x is calling. So we can see why that when we bet this size, what these sort of hands are accomplishing. Ace Queen is also only going to be in range like 20% of the time or so, if even. I mean, in a lot of games, people are going to pure 3-bet this. So they don't really have these nutted hands. And so these nutted hands want to get called by hands that they dominate. And that's pretty much it. We can choose a different size. We can go 321. We can see what happens here. And we are still getting called by a fuck ton of ace-x, because what else are they going to call with? We're getting called by a lot of king-x. And even still some 5x with some backdoors. So that's a pretty lucrative deal for these top of range single pair holdings. For different reasons, the aces and kings, not only for protection with the rest of the range, but they want to go smaller for other reasons, such that it's kind of hard for villain to have continues, which they can stack off with. So they kind of want villain or big blind to catch up a little bit, or maybe give them the opportunity to bluff a little bit. And so if you bet overbet top set like 3x pot or whatever, it's going to be pretty hard to get paid there. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but if we click this here, we're going to see that going 3x pot is going to massively underperform smaller sizes that keep ranges wide, or we're going to see that our highest EV option is just not bet at all. That should be relatively self-explanatory. And after we got the ace-x down, which is pretty obvious, I think the confusing thing when you look at this is why we see third pair. All of our 5x essentially overbetting massively in pretty high sizes here. So if we just look at Jack 5 or whatever, we see that it's going 300% pot, 26% of the time. It's going 183, 21% of the time. That is pretty fucking crazy. It's even more crazy with like the 6-5, 8-5. It's not much different. I mean, it's the same story here with all the 5x. And we have we're in a single raise pot in a wide formation. Our pair is going to be good a lot of the time. So you might be wondering, like, why on earth would we want to do this? And when you don't know why a hand wants to do something, instead of, sitting there scratching your head and trying to figure it out for the longest of times, the answer is usually just by looking to see what big blind does in response. So if we look at, let's just start with, let's go with 138 here. Let's see what happens. We fold out a fuck ton of king x, almost all of the offsuit king x, a lot of the suited king x, and we even start to get some of the ace-x's to fold, the worst ace-x's. And not only that, but we get 9s through 6s to fold, and less importantly, we take some of these random middling hands that had equity against us, both, fold equity if we were to play a passive line, or, just playing in position with 6 outs and a couple back doors maybe. We get those hands out. So what we essentially do is we get better hands to fold, and we get called by worse. We are getting called by 5x, and we were getting called by these gut shots with or without backdoors. So we get way, way, way better to fold, and we get worse to call. And another big non-negligible part of this is that we block their top of range hands. Like as we see, like big blind doesn't have aces, it doesn't have kings, it doesn't have ace king, and it only has a couple combos of ace five, which we block. So we block all of their best hands. We block ace five suited, we block king five suited, we block pocket fives, we block the best hands that they can have. So to be able to take away and so because we block their nutted hands, their top of range hands, the fold equity we get and the equity when called that we retain is just absolutely immaculate. So that's the small size. Let's go to the big size here. Look what happens now. This is fucking insane. So say we got like 6-5, 8-5. We fold out all the better 5x. We fold out more king x than before. We fold out all of the offsuit king x. And we fold out a fuck ton of the offsuit ace x and even some of the suited ace x. So we are getting like their best hands to start folding. And that is pretty huge. That EV is far greater than any showdown equity that third pair is going to have on the flop out of position in a wide range spot. That fold equity is going to, by an order of magnitude, overperform with respect to trying to take showdown value. And the more you study poker, the more you'll see in polarized spots. This is a trend. This is going to happen over and over and over again. So that gets the 5x out of the way. There are a lot of hand classes to go over here. The next would be the Jack X. The Jack X has another similar property to the 5, and also shares something with the 10 here. And that is that the Jack X blocks their best ace X's, just as the 10X does. So it doesn't particularly have a lot of great showdown. Yes, I know ace queen off is their best ace X, but they're not going to have it that often. The ace queen off is super mixed, and in the games that any of us are playing, they're probably not going to have them as often as they're supposed to. And queen X, the good kickers, are pretty good showdown value. Like they're the nut no pairs, which is pretty strong, and it has equity against a lot of lower pairs or a lot of other hands that have other sorts of equity. So there's no real reason to cling on to they have ace queen and to start getting crazy with that. But the Jack X and the 10X have a unique property of blocking their best top pair while lacking showdown value. And for some of these hands, they actually have pretty powerful backdoors. So the lower or the more separated the cards get from each other, like the queen deuce and the jack 4, the less they interact with folding out equity. But more importantly, they actually have more backdoor equity. Any 3 or a 4 or a deuce is going to have turned some additional equity, and then they still have the jack, the 10, the queen, and then a roughly quarter of the different backdoor flush draw combinations. So that is a significant number of outs that allows them to utilize everything they have working for them to generate a lot of necessary folds. And we already see what these sort of hands can fold. Depending on what size they employ, they fold out king X, they fold out, and the larger size is ace X, and they have the best equity when called with respect to the pool of hands in our range that want to generate folds, which is an enormous amount of them. So we go through the 10X and we see the same thing. We have pretty good blockers. We have some semblance of backdoors sometimes. We don't over interact with some of the hands that we want them to be folding. So we kind of accomplish a lot of the same things that the Jack X does here. And what we see here with the Queen X and Jack, the Queen Jack Queen 10 and Jack 10 here are fairly obvious. We have a stone cold draw to the nuts, and here we even have a backdoor draw with them. So this allows us to fold out equity, like hands that are better than us, as I'm being redundant here with the pairs that are higher than our high card sort of folds that we can make. But when we do face top of range, we have, roughly like 20 something percent chance of coolering the ever living shit out of them. And so that's kind of the same reason that the aces and the kings, the sets right here, the top sets, want to slow play, is the same, one of the same reasons why these sort of gut shot hands want to overbet now, is they want to give themselves the best chance to cooler the villain and get all of the money. And so that is how it achieves one of its multiple goals, of generating folds, of maintaining equity when called, and of coolering the opponent. So we go through that. 6-4 is going to operate pretty similarly to a lot of the other processes that we talked about, where 6-4 is going to turn equity in many of the same ways that Jack 4 and Queen Deuce are. Any 3, 4, 7, 8, deuce, etc., or backdoor flush draw sort of turn is going to generate equity for us. And also, we have very close to the nut low. I don't care what kind of backdoors 6 high has or what the board is. 6 highs, generally speaking, if not unanimously speaking, trying to get the villain to fold. So in a polarized range spot, this is a perfect candidate for all those reasons. We get to the threes and deuces, and they kind of have a lot of options of what they want to do. They're bottom of range, they can start bluffing right off the bat. They can take their showdown. They can range bet, and they can get called by worse hands, or they can fold out slightly better. As we see with some of these middling sizes, we will get some percentage of folds from pairs, not tons and tons, but it's not unheard of, although this is pretty small. But twos can get threes and fours to fold, and obviously as you go bigger, you will see more of that. But yeah, it basically has the properties to where it can kind of do whatever it wants. Has a lot of things going for it. The last class here is the suited connectors. So it's not that these hands have anything special about them. I mean, it is true 7-6 will turn equity fairly often. Same with like the 8-6, 8-7, stuff like that. That isn't negligible at all, not to say that it is. But the reality is all of these hands would rather just generate a fold and win the pot right away. But some of these hands are just too bad. Like Jack 8 off, despite the blocker thing and technically a backdoor, like it's just too weak. GTO wants to be balanced, so there are definitely going to be cases in blind versus blind. The more you study them, where you find that if you node lock and understand your opponent's tendencies, there are likely a plethora of solutions where you could just genuinely overbet any queen jack off and worse hand in your entire range at 100% frequency and print by doing that. There are definitely scenarios where you're going to be playing opponents where that will be a profitable node lock and exploitative play that you can make. But while we're still in the land of game theory, you can't just go crazy and go willy-nilly with wide range spots and polarized spots and haphazardly choose combos to go crazy with, unless you have better reason to, like solid understanding of opponents' tendencies and what the game theory solution looks like, and why you get to node lock and mess with your own frequencies and baselines because of that. But until we're in that scenario, these are some pretty shitty hands that just don't make good candidates for that. And the one thing that some of these 8-6, 7-6, 8-9 hands do is, while still having the same goal as the other hands, they retain the best equity when called and coverage with respect to unblocking folding range to be able to accomplish that goal of generating folds. Now we will see that we have the small size here, and the small size is could be a little bit confusing. It's something that you're going to see a lot more on rainbow boards. And a board where you're going to see the in position preflop, or just the preflop raiser and aggressor, utilizing both an overbetting strategy and like somewhat of a range betting strategy, or a lot of small bet sizing bets, I guess, to be kind of redundant there, is going to be when you have both a range advantage and a nut advantage. And we can see that here with the small blind, the blue line. We have all of the nutted hands, and every part of like our distribution is just higher off. So in these sort of scenarios, if your equity chart is going to look like this, and you're going to have a rainbow texture or something like that, it's not going to be that rare to see, an array of overbets and some of these smaller sizes here. As you can see, like we double their best hands or their good hands, and we still have like the same amount of weak hands. Our equity is enormous. EV is enormous. And we're working with, we got a massive amount of combos in play, 465. I'm probably closer to 500 with the hands that I open a little bit. But what we get to do is, as I said, Jack 8 off wants to generate folds, like 8-7 off wants to generate folds. Like it's not overbetting because it doesn't want to fold and take advantage of the nut advantage to get them to fold out 9 high or 10 high or, king 10 or something like that. It's just that despite it not being able to be haphazard and just kind of be willy-nilly with the combos that it selects to overbet with, it still wants to generate folds. So one of the ways that it does that is it just bets small. And when you bet small, say you bet about 35% pot here or so, you're still going to get folds. So when you bet 1/3 pot, 75% of the range needs to continue. Well, they're not continuing 75% of the range. They're continuing 69% of the range. And that's only if your opponent finds all the right floats. I don't think that a lot of players in the games that we're playing are going to be floating here with 7-8 suited, 6-8 suited, 7-6 suited, Jack deuce suited, queen deuce suited, So if they're not finding these floats, then you really, if they're folding some of these pairs, even these under pairs, then you really get to over realize with this bet size in particular. Now you can do this with a number of hands. Like I said, in these wide range spots, it's going to be so hard to play a GTO defense strategy if you're not like super familiar and intentional, that there's going to be a lot of node locks and exploits available to you. Like if we look at the different bet sizings and we think of MDF, minimum defense frequency, with respect to how much they have to continue as some of their range with respect to facing certain bet sizes, the odds of every player finding all the calls with king 6 off and king deuce suited when facing an overbet is very small. So all of these sizes, your worst in range hands get to over realize by betting probably any size that it chooses, given that they're going to be overfolding to every size. And so it's kind of up to you which size you want to use in a particular context to generate your hand's goal, which for a lot of these hands, it's just going to be generating folds. So you want to generate folds responsibly. And for some of these hands, the most effective way to do that responsibly is just go small, because they're still going to fold a fuck ton. They're still going to fold a third of their range to a 38% pot bet, which is absolutely incredible that we get to get away with that. And so that's what the bottom of range, the bottom of our equity graph wants to do. But it also, it allows us to get value with our other hands. So a lot of our ace-X wants to take advantage of the range advantage that we have. It wants to build a pot. And having these combos betting like that as just described allows us to get value with our top pairs and our second pairs. So yeah, ace 9 suited or ace 7 off might not be high enough in our top pair range or our made hand range to be able to effectively overbet 300% pot and get called by a worse hand enough of the time, as often as it needs to. But that isn't to say that we can't bet. So we just get to size down and we can go 20% or 50% or 38%. And we still get to be called by, by a theoretical player. We're getting called by 8-6 or queen deuce or pocket sixes or pocket deuces. And so all of these hands, including the king X, get to incorporate some sort of small size and continue to build a pot where their equity when called is retained, and they get to play bigger pots with a range advantage, where they get to continue versus a villain range that they dominate every step of the way. And that's kind of what we're doing all across the board here. And when you think about it like that, and you don't look at this just as some whole pie and whatever, and try to guess or skim through what everything is doing, despite flop strategies not always particularly being the best way to study or understand poker, in this spot in particular, and as we will see in later spots, this gives us a good roadmap of why we're doing what we're doing, of how these hands want to play in later streets, and how we can use these concepts in other more standard spots where the ranges aren't as wide and the maneuverability is a little bit more straightforward. So if you watched that, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.